What? No, no, no. I don't want to buy any life insurance. What do you mean, why not? Look, honey, I'm a ghost, which means you are several years too late for that. Besides, as I said, I'm a ghost, and ghosts don't use money. No, we don't use Bitcoin either. Look, I gotta go. No, there isn't a better time to call. Goodbye. Ah, geez. Oh, hi guys, thanks for stopping by. Though I'm not sure if the old ghost host will be good company tonight. I gotta tell you that whenever I get a call from one of those yahoos, I get a splitting headache. What? Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe telling a few stories might help. Tonight's first story comes from a dude that is helping his friend to move when he has an encounter. It's called A Door with the Shakes.
This morning, I was watching a YouTube video, and it reminded me of something that happened about a decade ago. I've been meaning to share this for a while, so here we go. I swear this story is 100% true, and my mom, who was there with me, can back me up. It was around 2015. My girlfriend, now my wife, and I were living in an old apartment building. It was 12 stories tall, and we were up on the 10th floor. One of our close friends had just moved into an apartment on the 2nd floor, so we spent the day helping her move in. My wife, my mom, who was always down to help someone move, and I were running up and down between the U-Haul, the 2nd floor, and our apartment. Since we were in and out constantly, we didn't bother locking any of the doors. This is important later. At one point, my mom and I went down to the U-Haul for another load of boxes. We carried them back up to our friend's apartment on the 2nd floor, same as we'd done a bunch of times already. But when we got there, the door was locked. We knocked, expecting her to open it and maybe apologize for locking it. But nothing. We waited 5, maybe 10 minutes, knocking every so often and calling her name. At first, we just assumed she was in the bathroom or something, and any minute now, she'd open the door and make a joke about dropping the kids off at the pool. Then, out of nowhere, the doorknob started shaking violently. It wasn't just a little jiggle. It was like someone on the other side was frantically trying to lock or unlock the door. The whole thing rattled back and forth, shaking the entire door. At first, I thought maybe she'd been changing or something and panicked when she heard us outside. The weird thing is there was no sound. No footsteps. No voice. Nothing. Just the doorknob going crazy for about 10 to 15 seconds. It was enough time for us to stand there and watch the doorknob twisting and turning as the door pushed back and forth. My mom and I looked at each other like, "What the hell?" Finally, we left the boxes outside the door and headed back up to the 10th floor. I had left my phone, and my mom didn't have our friend's number, so when we walked into our apartment, I called out to my wife, asking her to call our friend and let her know we'd been standing at her locked door with boxes. But as I came into the kitchen, I froze. There, standing casually, were my wife and our friend, talking and having drinks. I just stood there, dumbfounded. My mom came in behind me and froze too. They noticed and asked what was wrong. I looked at our friend and said, "Who's in your apartment? We've been knocking at your locked door for 10 minutes, and someone just locked the door and never answered." She looked at me like I was crazy and said she hadn't been in her apartment for at least the last 20 minutes. She swore she hadn't locked the door all day and there should be no one besides us in her apartment. At that point, I was freaked out. We all went back down to her apartment to check. When we got there, the door was unlocked, and the place was empty. The only sign we'd even been there were the boxes still sitting outside her door. To this day, my mom and I can't explain what happened. There was no noise inside the apartment, no movement, no voice, nothing. If we'd been at the wrong door, you'd think someone would have at the least yelled at us to leave. But we were at the right door, with the boxes still there to prove it. The only semi-logical explanation I can come up with is maybe a maintenance guy was in there, locked the door behind him, and panicked when we knocked. But even that doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't he just open the door and explain? Why stay silent and leave as soon as we walked away? And the silence behind the door was so unnatural for someone being just on the other side of it. Good news is our friend lived in that apartment for over 2 years and never reported anything strange. But whenever I bring it up, my mom and I both remember it vividly. Her and my wife still try to find some kind of logical explanation, but I'm convinced that place was haunted. Anyway, that's my ghost story. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want, I've got another story about the time I lived in a studio apartment in downtown Denver where the building used to be a children's hospital or something. Nothing major happened there, but the shower curtain would always fall at convenient times of the night, the building's fire alarm would constantly go off, and I'm pretty sure the ghost in that place was a bit of a perv. Let me know if you want to hear that one.
I bet the YouTube video you were watching must have been haunted bedtime stories. Am I right, or am I right? Next, we have one from a gas station clerk that has a kinda interesting night at work. This story is called, Something's Not Right at My Work.
A little background. I work at a gas station and grocery store. It's the same company, different buildings, in a town in West Texas. I have been with the company for quite some time now, but have been working in the gas station for a little over a year now. When I first started, all was copacetic. I rarely closed. We close at 11, which was nice, but to get more hours I decided to start closing. My first closing shift, my manager put me to work in the cooler. Think big walk-in cooler with shelves on one side with backstock, and the back of the soda shelves on the other side leading to the main store. I had heard many ghost stories from previous employees and my current coworkers that closed regularly, but I was sure they were just tired or letting their minds wander because this job isn't that exciting besides the occasional Karen. While I was in the cooler, I had an AirPod in and was listening to music. I was convinced either my music was glitching or that I was hearing someone else in the cooler with me. I wasn't hearing voices, I was hearing presence, like body noises, sniffling, occasional deep breaths, scratching, feet sliding, etc. When I would go to investigate, there was nothing. These strange noises kept up for weeks while I began to close more regularly. At my store, the lights have a timer to save on power, so about every 15 minutes I would have to open the cooler door and push the button again. I had become very familiar with the layout of the cooler, having walked through it many times with only the glow of the outside lights peering through the shelves of sodas to guide me. This night in particular, it seemed to be darker when the lights shut off, almost like the air was thick and suppressing the light. After about the third pass, though, the cooler to push the light button, I hit what I thought was the corner of the last shelf before the cooler turns, but I swear I was nowhere close to that part of the cooler. And what I hit was almost soft, like when you put two magnets to close and they begin to repel each other. It wasn't abrupt, but a simple push from some unseen force. After my encounter with the corner, I immediately got cold. Sure, the cooler was obviously cold, but this was a cold that you can only achieve by wearing nothing but boxers outside during winter for hours. I swear my core froze solid. It became hard to breathe. I almost felt starving, like I haven't ate for months. But as fast as this feeling overcame me, it passed. Days later, I am doing an opening shift on a Sunday. In the South, many stores are closed on Sundays because of church, and the few that are open have little to no customers because of the reason stated. It is about 5 a.m., and I am brewing the teas for the day, and my GM is sitting in the office doing our morning paperwork, adjusting gas prices, etc., and she pops out to tell me she has to run to the main grocery store to grab some things for our shelves. This part of opening always scared me because I see those robbing videos on Twitter, X, and we can't lock the door with only one staff member inside, so I just continue on finishing the opening tasks. It's pitch black outside and almost darker past the shelves on the cooler. While the last tea is brewing, I have a quick memory of the last guy I had served the night before. I opened, yes, it sucked. He had gotten 4 tall boys. I went to push up the rest of the stuff behind them in preparation for the Sunday football rush around noon, and as I reached my hand to the back of the column, I felt a cold, soft, and almost childlike hand rest on top of mine. I immediately pulled my how freezing hand out of the cooler, dragging about 12 cans with it, and ran to the front door to wait for my manager. Surely it was just my brain, I was tired, but I swear I could see a shadow or aura or something through the small crack illuminated by the little light there was in the store. When my manager arrived, I held it together until we got to the office. While I was tearing up telling her everything, brown liquid started to leak under the door. The office is adjacent to the insect counter that had the standing teapot. I opened the door, and the teapot was still dispensing boiling water, even though the tea urn was completely full. The filter that held the teas on the floor, and the mystery brown liquid we now know was tea had made its way all over the store. We reviewed the cameras and couldn't find anything. I have more stories and some stories from coworkers I'll happily include if you'll want. Just wanted to share my paranormal experience.
Wait a second. You have more? I mean, wasn't that terrifying enough? But sure, I think we'd love to hear more. Next up, we have one from someone that has a creepy ice cream delivery at 2 a.m. Gee, I think any ice cream delivery at 2 a.m. would be creepy. This story is called A Mysterious Ice Cream Truck.
Last night, around 2 a.m., I was woken up by a sound I hadn't heard since childhood. An ice cream truck jingle. You know the kind. Cheerful, slightly warped, and oddly creepy when heard at night. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the sound got louder, and when I peeked out my window, there it was. A small, vintage ice cream truck rolling slowly down my suburban street. The thing looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, with faded stickers of ice cream bars plastered on its side. I watched as it stopped in front of my neighbor's house. No lights were on over there, and I was pretty sure they were out of town. The truck just sat there, idling, the music still playing. Then, the engine cut off, and the jingle slowed to a stop, like a record player running out of power. And here's the weird part. The driver got out, but instead of heading to the neighbor's door, he started walking toward my house. I froze. I live alone. I didn't know what to do, so I just stayed at the window, hoping he didn't see me. He got to my driveway and stood there, looking up at my window like he knew I was watching. I swear he waved. Then he just turned around, got back in the truck, and drove off. This morning, I checked my driveway, and there was a single ice cream sandwich sitting there, perfectly placed in the center. I don't know what's creepier, that he left it or that I ate it.
Well, I guess you'd be the one to ask the question. I'm sure everyone wants answered. What exactly does a 40-year-old ice cream sandwich taste like? After that last story, does anyone else have a hankering for some ice cream? Or is it just me? Anyway, on to our last story for the night. It comes from an OP that has a tale to tell. Too bad no one believes her. Her story is called Nobody Believed Me, and I don't think nobody ever will.
I've had countless paranormal and spiritual experiences as a child, but this one has always stuck with me. 13 years ago, when I was around 6 or 7 years old, my mom, older sister, our little puppy, and I were living in my mom's boyfriend's apartment. The apartment had 3 rooms. The room on the far left was my sister's and mine, the room on the far right belonged to my mom and her boyfriend, and the one room in the middle we called the middle room. We were told not to go into the middle room because it was BF's mom's room. I still remember her. She was very tall and slender, standing at least 6 feet tall. She looked to be in her 70s, with gray, kinky hair. We didn't see her leave the middle room much, but when she did, she would play games with my sister and me. At first, it was fun, and my older sister seemed to love her, but then I would get a dreadful, uncomfortable feeling around her, so I tried to avoid her as much as possible. I think she noticed, because she started treating me differently, pinching me when no one was looking, pulling my hair, and scratching me. Whenever I told my mom, she wouldn't believe me or would brush it off. To be honest, my mom wasn't the greatest parent. Even our little German Shepherd puppy didn't like her. He would bark and growl at her every time she came out of the room. My mom's boyfriend hated the barking and would argue with my mom about it. The fights got so bad that he eventually said either the dog goes, or we all go. My mom gave the dog away. I remember my sister and me crying as we said goodbye to Shiloh. One day, we didn't see the old lady at all. I asked my sister where she was, and she just shrugged and said, maybe she doesn't feel like playing today, then went back to playing leapfrog. I was happy not to see her that day. That night, everyone went to bed as usual. But I woke up in the middle of the night because I needed to use the bathroom. The bathroom was right in front of the middle room, so I couldn't avoid passing by it. As I walked toward the bathroom, I noticed the door to the middle room was slightly ajar, with light spilling out into the hallway. I got that bad feeling again, but I still wanted to see what was inside. I peeked through the gap in the door, and what I saw will stay with me forever. The old lady was there, but her back was turned to me. She was twitching in a strange, unnatural way, and her skin was gray, like a corpse. She smelt terrible, like rotting flesh. I just stood there, frozen. Suddenly, she turned her head toward me, her eyes completely black. Her face looked gray, like it was decaying. I cried and ran back to my room, diving under the covers and praying she wouldn't come to the door. Thankfully, she didn't. I didn't sleep much that night, but eventually, I dozed off when the sun came up. When I woke up, my sister wasn't in the room, so I cautiously walked out, still terrified. I found everyone sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast, but the old lady wasn't there. I ran to my mom and told her everything I had seen. My mom's boyfriend gave her a look, and my mom looked angry and said, "Tiara, fake name, what are you talking about?" I started crying and pointed to her boyfriend and said, "Your mom." My mom popped me on the arm and yelled at me to apologize. I cried and threw a tantrum because they didn't believe me. Every time I explained it all over again, my mom's BF would get madder and finally he stood up, took me by the arm, and dragged me to the middle room and opened the door. The room was empty. There was old clothes, old jewelry and old purses that looked to belong to an old lady. The room smelled of dust like no one has been in it for a long time. He dragged me further into the room and pointed to a picture on top of the dresser. In the picture it was the BF's mom, but she looked younger, her hair was black, she had an afro, and she was smiling. He said, "Look here, that's my mom. She passed away 15 years ago." I was so shocked and scared and started crying even more, so I was sent back to my room and put in timeout. No matter how many times I told the story, no one ever believed me. The nightmares started soon after. Almost every night, I'd dream of her standing at the edge of my bed, laughing at me. Eventually, my mom and her boyfriend had a massive argument and broke up. We moved out and went to live with my grandma. Years later, when I was 11 and my sister was 13, I asked her if she remembered the old lady, our mom's ex-BF's mom. To my surprise, she said she'd never seen an old lady back then. She admitted she only played along because she figured she was my imaginary friend. I did daydream a lot as a kid. Still, even now at 19, I know what I saw. And to this day, no one believes me.
Well, do you know what I believe? I believe that your mom's ex and his mom just goes to show that sometimes being an a-hole is a genetic disorder. I mean, honestly, if I was your mom, I would have kept the dog and got rid of the BF. Well, I'll be damned, those stories did help a bit. Well, except maybe the third story, I'll admit, it made me a bit nauseous. But it is getting late, so I think it's time for you to go. But before you leave, could you do me a little favor? Could you please hit like, subscribe, and share this video? It'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, or have any thoughts about our stories tonight, or if you have any suggestions on subjects for upcoming videos, or even just general thoughts about my channel, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares.